Hi, everyone. Welcome, troubadours, to another edition of the Inside Scoop. And today we are going to be talking with Patrick Baker, who runs a company called Prime of Life Tech. So yes, we're talking about tech. For those of you who know me, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with tech. And so thankfully, there's people like Patrick to help us out. So I'm really glad that you're here, Patrick. And obviously in 20 minutes or so, we are not going to be able to cover all the things, but we are going to go over a lot of things. And as you guys probably know or are finding out, a lot of the people that I'm bringing in to interview, there's a reason behind it. And it's usually because it's something that I struggle with in my business, running the business, or even just struggle with in life. And I know that a lot of you have the same issues. So it's a little bit self-serving, and I will admit that, but I know a lot of people have issues with tech, and we are going to be talking mostly about, I'm thinking in terms of this computer, you've got like this information, you're running a business, right? So that information is important. It's not like a recipe that you could lose and it doesn't really matter, right? So the file management and the security of your files and being able to organize them and find them when you need them and protect your information, all of that stuff is super important. I know some of us are have a better handle on that than others. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So Patrick, I'm super happy that you're here and you will be patient with my questions, I am sure. So before we get started with our questions, will you take a few minutes and introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure thing, Lori. Thank you so much for having me on the program today. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Let's see. So Prime of Life Tech, you were talking about how, you struggle with certain things technology-wise. And, that's actually one of the things, that's kind of part of my why, really, is I like to demystify technology for people. I firmly believe that technology should not be as difficult to use as it can be. And that's a whole discussion unto itself. However, that being said, I feel like in a lot of ways I'm kind of the bridge there for people to get to that understanding or solve that problem. Troubleshooting is kind of my superpower. So being able to get to the root of a problem and solve it, that's pretty satisfying, pretty gratifying for me, as well as for my clients. So, but all that being said, with files and, running a business off of a laptop, which a lot of us are doing these days, that's, how do you protect your data? How do you manage your data? Those are, very detailed discussions could be wrought from those questions.
Right.
But trying to keeping it real for 20 minutes or whatever. The first thing I would say is that, if your entire world is on this hard drive, on this device that you carry around with you, and that information is nowhere else in the universe, that's a problem right off the bat. Okay.
Absolutely.
There are solutions that are either cloud-based, things like Google Drive, Dropbox, Microsoft's OneDrive, iCloud for the Apple universe. Everybody doles out, a free amount of space, and then once you hit the limit, you've got options in terms of how much more space you want to buy. That's kind of a personal decision in terms of, I would base that decision on two things.
Okay.
Which devices do you use the most? Are you using your PC the most? Are you using your Apple devices the most? Are you using some hybrid combination? Do you have an Android phone? All of those things will kind of make a difference in terms of sort of which universe you want to put all your stuff.
Mhm.
So if you're like most people, you probably have some stuff in a lot of places. Like you probably have stuff in iCloud, you probably have stuff in OneDrive, Google Drive, um, Dropbox, and so on. So
Is
how do
that
you
bad?
manage it all?
Yeah,
No,
yeah, is that a
it's
bad thing?
no, it's kind of a mother a necessity type of thing. In other words, if I have an Android phone, there are certain services that I'm sort of locked into using right off the bat. Like
Sure.
I have to have a Google account to use
Mhm.
an Android phone. I have to have an iCloud account to use any kind of Apple device, whether it's
Right.
an iPhone, an iPad, a MacBook, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so Microsoft, same kind of thing. They really want you to use the Microsoft login and everything that comes along for the ride with that, including your OneDrive storage.
Right.
So
Right.
um, anyhow, we could rat hole about all that kind of
So,
stuff for a long time.
well,
That's all the cloud stuff, right?
okay.
Then there's the local option, right?
Mhm.
So the local option would be something like a USB hard drive, right? So like back in the day, and the back in the day being, let's say, the 1990s, right?
Okay.
Hard drives were small, hard drives were expensive. Um, there was such a thing as tape backup that
Yeah, so
small people were small business people were using, that kind of thing. Um, you didn't even have like large capacity USB, thumb drives,
mhm.
right? Now
Mhm.
you've got all kinds of options in terms of local storage. You've got high capacity USB hard drives. You can get a thumb drive that will hold a terabyte. That's a
Oh,
ton of
wow.
space,
Mhm.
right? Um, you can get solid state or the mechanical hard drives that'll hold a lot of space as well, like 1, 2, 4 terabytes, right? That's an easy no-brainer solution because you plug it into a USB port. You can either copy things over. There's backup solutions depending on what your platform is that you can use, PC or Mac, that kind of thing. But then you have the issue of uh, redundancy or the lack of it,
I wanted
right?
to, yeah, and that's what I was wanted to ask you too. How redundant do we need to be? If I've got something on my laptop and then I also have it in Dropbox and then it's also being backed up on Carbonite and then I also have certain things on a flash drive. It's like, how many copies do we really need of that stuff? And
Well,
where
yeah,
should they be? Like physically, you mentioned the USB drive, and it's like, yeah, that's a great idea. But then if it's sitting right next to your laptop, how protective is that really?
sure. No, absolutely. No, I hear you. No, like if you, and yeah, we didn't even get to services like Carbonite, where you're trusting this third party service to essentially back up your entire computer, right?
Mhm. Right.
So not just your data, but all your software and your operating system and
Mhm.
how everything's set up and all that stuff, right? So that is kind of the nth degree of redundancy, right? So yeah, redundancy. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the belt and suspenders approach, right?
Okay.
Um, uh, but how many copies do you need? It depends on what it is. It depends on how large it is. Um, and I also think it depends on how quickly and how readily you need to be able to access those backups.
Mhm.
So, for example, let's say you've got a book manuscript, right? That you're probably going to want to have not only multiple copies of it, but you're going to want to have the ability to like go back in time in terms of like, yeah, I want to go back in time like 3 edits into, like 2 days ago to see what I wrote in chapter 4. Because
Oh,
what I had there, I liked, and I totally screwed it up, or whatever,
right.
um, that kind of thing. I mean, there's so yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of fine degrees of redundancy that we're talking about here, right? So
So then when you're,
anyhow,
so talking about that makes me think of what kind of a business you run, right? I mean, depending on what kind of a business you run, because I'm also thinking if I create graphic files, for example, or content, written words, files that is somebody's website content, it feels like that's a little bit more important, right?
well, if you're a photographer, I mean,
Yes.
right?
Mm,
You got to think about things like um, uh, capacity. How much, because like image files, those things are huge,
right.
right?
True.
They can be. Even with graphic design, you can get into some fairly large files if you want to have something that's print ready. If you're gonna create a graphic that's going to cover the side of a building, how big does that image have to be, right?
Mhm.
In digital form.
Right.
I honestly don't know,
Yeah.
but anyhow, um,
And
anyway,
sometimes
food for thought.
yeah, because sometimes it's not even that you create it, but I know for me, a client might send me their files. And so I start feeling like it's my responsibility to somehow organize those and keep those because if it's a file for a printer, I can make the assumption that, oh, the client probably kept a copy of it, oh, the printer probably has a copy of it, oh, the graphic designer probably has a copy of it, but I don't necessarily want to bank on that. So maybe it's starting by figuring out what you've got, how important it is, and then you get to this place that you're talking about where you figure out, how am I going to back it up and save it, and how redundant does it need to be?
Right. So yeah, so kind of back to that question. Um, First off, everybody has a free 15 gigabytes of Google Drive. If you have a Gmail account, you have 15 gigabytes of cloud storage, just boom, right
Hmm,
off the bat,
okay.
right? Now, Google just changed their free storage plan for things like photos, any content created in any of their office type apps like Docs, sheets, slides, and so on. That content now counts against your free 15 gig. The
Oh,
other thing to consider is that your Gmail account, any attachments that you have, they also count now against that free 15 gigabytes. So you're going to have to be a little bit more mindful about managing that free space. That being said,
you mean like clean out your email occasionally?
yeah, or yeah, if you're, I mean, I personally don't like it. I don't like sending big attachments through email. Um, it's just not what it's built for. Um,
Oh, good point. So,
and so, like for example, so that's and I need to do some exploration, but Google just changed this policy with their storage on the 1st of June. They were supposed to simultaneously release some better tools for managing your files. I need to look into that and see what that really means. Good blog piece. But anyway,
right.
anyhow, but the point being is that you should be able to hunt down large attachments in your Gmail and save them off some other way, delete the email, whatever it takes to kind of free the storage up. But again, it's just something to be mindful of. All that being said, I get almost a daily email reminder from Apple telling me that my free iCloud space, which is only 5 gig, has almost been consumed, right? And so I need to look into, well, gee, why is that exactly? So I mean, I know it's backing up my iPad,
Mhm.
but what does that mean in terms of what it's backing up, what's taking up all that space? They're also telling me that, for only, I don't know, some ridiculously low price, I can get a whole bunch more space.
Okay.
Right.
So you bringing that up makes me think about this, and I don't know what your thoughts are. If you're getting something for free, right? If it's, we're talking backup now, so whether it's OneDrive or Google Drive or what have Dropbox, whatever, anything that you're using, is it safe to assume? I know it's never safe to assume, I guess, but is it safe to assume that if it's free, it's probably not going to be enough potentially? Like, I think about using Dropbox, and I reached the point where I needed more so quickly. Or for Zoom, I can record a Zoom meeting to the cloud, and I could record it on my hard drive. I reached my capacity so fast. And so it seems to me like when it's free, not that it's a trick, but that it's never going to be enough. Is that just me, or is that kind of the way that these things are built?
In some respects, that's by design, I would say. When they only give you, say, 5 gigabytes of free space, I mean, that sounds like a lot of space, and in reality, it is a pretty good chunk of space. But 5 gigabytes can go pretty quick, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So like with Apple, with iCloud, you get 5 free. I've pretty much used my 5. And so I've got to decide, am I gonna bite? Am I gonna get the extra space, pay for that on a monthly basis or annual basis? Usually they give you a break if you pay a year in advance.
Right.
For a lot of online services are going that way.
So I have
anyway.
Sorry, I have a kind of a management question, of like file management question. If you, I mean, I'll raise my hand right away that I'm going to be lazy when it comes to like managing some of this tech, but I know it's important. So that's why I use something like Carbonite, because I just know it backs up everything. And maybe that's overkill, but if we're having to make these decisions of, clean out my email, move all these files that are large someplace else, do all these things, to me, that sounds like that creates another level of work that I have to do to try and constantly be managing what I want to keep, how big it is, and where am I going to put it. So how do you make that determination of, do I just flat save everything because I don't have time to manage it, or is it worth my time to go in and figure out, like, weekly, this goes here, that goes there?
I think it all depends on what you're dealing with. Okay. So let's just take email, for example, right? I could go to my inbox and I can easily just park my index finger on the delete key and just delete, because there's a lot of stuff that's either it's spam, it's advertising, it's old and no longer relevant, whatever. Yep. That kind of thing, pretty easy to do on a fairly regular basis, but it's tedious, right?
Yes.
So now we're talking things like client related information, whether it's emails, files, things, some information sort of in process in terms of some project that you're working on, in whatever form. Maybe you've got a Slack conversation, maybe you're doing that you're in that world, that type of thing. There's so many inputs, right? There's so much information coming from so many different sources. But on the client side, especially, I think it's important to come up with some kind of system, whether you have folders for filing things, whether you have things like some sort of tagging system, some way of using keywords in the search. But those are ways that you can sort of manage this mountain of information that we all have to sort of like sift through on an almost daily basis just to function and
right. And it can feel very time consuming doing it. So I guess maybe the lesson is anything that can become a process that we do, that we just repeatedly do this process over and over, and then have a tool to manage that, then that's going to be easier.
I think if you come up with a system, whether it's how you name something, a file, a folder, um, some way of associating it with a client or a project, the relative importance of that information, I think would determine the degree of redundancy that you need. In other words, do I need to have it in the cloud, on my hard drive, and on my 1 terabyte USB drive, whatever, thumb drive, or am I just dealing with emails?
Right.
And all my emails are in the cloud, and I can access those from any computer as long as it has a browser, assuming that you have that kind of email.
So we've obviously got a little bit of strategy on the front end and trying to figure this out. And we could talk about this all day, but there's something I really want to talk to you about. I'm guessing, I was going to say it's near and dear to your heart. I don't know if it's near and dear to your heart or not, but I'm guessing it might be. And that is this idea of just the protection, not just the backup and being able to find it, but the protection. So if we're talking about things like fraud and identity theft and viruses and all of that nasty stuff that seems like it's going on so much.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you some questions.
Ransomware, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Like passwords and protection, and what kind of software do we need on a very basic level, and knowing
Sure.
it's a business, what do we do about that? Because I'm guessing everyone has had some kind of experience either with, hacking or fraud or something.
Sure. Well, so, we're really talking about sort of two key areas there, or I would say two central themes. One is data security. The other one would be identity protection, or avoiding identity theft.
Okay.
Right. So let's tackle those one at a time.
Okay.
As far as data security is concerned, each of us deal with, I would say, what I would call secure information on a daily basis. Okay, that can fall into really kind of two categories. One would be what is known as personally identifying information. In other words, core information like your full legal name, your birth date, your social security number, your driver's license number, even your legal address. Those 5 pieces of information, somebody could take out a loan in your name with those 5 pieces of information, right?
Right.
So how do you? And so on the one hand, yeah, big scary, that could happen. But on the other hand, those 5 pieces of information need to be transmitted on a almost daily basis to various different kinds of entities. So how can you do that in a secure way, whether it's in the form of a document, whether it's in the form of a online form on a website, if it's you're just literally giving those individual or some subset of that chunk of information to another person individually. How can you do that securely?
Right.
So let's break that down. So on the documentation side, if you are using services like Google Drive, like Dropbox, pretty much all the big cloud services, they are supposed to be encrypted, secure connections between your device and the cloud service, and by extension, the other individual who is connecting to that cloud service should also have a secure encrypted connection. So no one who has the capability to snoop Wi-Fi or any kind of, transmissions, like at a coffee shop or at an office or something like that. Even if they could get into the secure network that you should be signed on to when you're using Wi-Fi, they shouldn't be able to access those documents because they should be encrypted. Or the communication between your device and the cloud should be encrypted. And even if they were able to access the bits and construct something cogent, I don't think you would be able to actually decipher the content of that communication. So that's on the file side. On the more like on the messaging side, let's say you're talking to your insurance agent, and your insurance agent, you hang up the phone, they send you a text and they say, oh, I need your social security number to complete blah, blah, blah. Now, here's where it gets a little sort of dicey. Your standard, what's known as SMS or text messaging, is not secure, okay? It can be, to someone who has the knowledge and the technical wherewithal, those communications could be intercepted. Okay. That being said, if your insurance agent and you both use an iPhone and you're using Apple's iMessage software, that communication is encrypted. So you could confidently, or more confidently, send that piece of personally identifying information over the air via iMessage to your insurance agent. If your insurance agent has an Android phone and you have an iPhone or some other mixture there, it's not going to be encrypted.
Okay.
So I'm using iMessage, but the other person is using an Android phone, it's not going to be an encrypted communication, not recommended. Now, let's flip over to the Android universe. So if I'm going to be using Google's messaging software, so I'm talking specifically Google's, and they call it, what do they call it? Messages. Google's Messages software, which is pretty common. If you have like the stock rollout of Android, you're probably using Google's Messages software. If you're using a Samsung, if you're using some other manufacturer's version of Android, you're probably not using Google's Messages software. Okay. Now, if, however, you have two people, they're both using the same software, the Google software, that's also encrypted. That was the whole point of that. You can, if you're using a Samsung or some other manufacturer's Android phone, you can download and install the Google Messages software and make that your primary, text messaging software for your Android phone. But again, there's no guarantee that,
both
the person,
parties are using
the
it.
insurance, Jim, your insurance agent, is also using that particular software on his Android phone. So, it's kind of dicey that way. However, that being said, there are other apps, things like Signal, things like WhatsApp. What's the other one I'm thinking of? It's totally escapes me off the top of my head. I think it was WhatsApp. Yeah, it is WhatsApp. WhatsApp. Anyway, all of those are encrypted. They have encrypted. They have encrypted messaging. WhatsApp is pretty commonly used for text and voice for international calling. Just because you can do those kinds of calls for low or no cost, I think.
Yes.
So anyway.
Okay. So, so to me, it seems like hearing the bottom line is you need to pay attention and you need to be careful. But like you mentioned, we still have to trade some of that information. So maybe it's just knowing in our heads um, what we're
What's safe, what's not,
right.
what's
Okay.
encrypted and what's not.
Okay.
Like, let's go back to documents for a second.
Okay.
If I have my I don't know, let's say I have my will, right? I'm working on my will with my lawyer, right? I'm not going to be emailing copies of that back and forth with my lawyer, because email's not secure.
Okay.
Okay, just not, don't do it. Anything that has any confidential information, anything that, and we didn't even get to the other type of information that I was referring to, and that's proprietary information. So I'm working with clients, I'm working with companies,
Oh, yes.
right? Right. I've got, I've got confidential trade secret type information that I, as a contractor working with this company, I cannot allow their information to get out into the wild, right?
Right. And well,
So,
banking and healthcare. I mean, there's
right,
tons of that. Yeah.
right, all that kind of stuff. So we need to be able to rely on secure file transfer services like Google Drive, like Dropbox, and these other things, as opposed to sending documents to the email, which, as I mentioned before, when we were talking about big attachments, it's just not what it's meant for, right? Email is literally was literally designed for sending messages, right? Right? I mean, that's it, right? It was like, basically, I mean, we don't, my first, in my very first job out of college, we used computers, but we didn't have internal email. So we typed memorandums and printed them and made copies on copiers and put them in the little cubby boxes for the other employees, right?
Yes.
Um, right. As opposed to now, you just go and you send an email, or even better now, you get on Slack or you get on Microsoft Teams or whatever messaging platform you're using, where you can send an email, you can send secure attachments, right? We didn't even talk about that whole universe there, but like if
Right.
I'm in Slack, I'm in Microsoft Teams or whatever, and I've got this proprietary company information, well, I can actually deposit that file into whatever chat room I'm in with my client,
Yeah.
with my team, and we can actually like display it and share the screen and do all the kinds of things that you can do on Zoom.
Right.
But the point being is that that's all secure. That's all got the encryption, the encrypted layer around it as far as security is concerned. Email doesn't have that.
Okay. You know what? If we have, for me, and I know just not for me, I would say to everybody listening, that I think that is the number one golden nugget takeaway from this whole thing is that realizing what email is really meant for, and not that it's necessarily abused, but how we're using it and how that can make us vulnerable. And I think if nothing else, I'm going to be changing some of my practices as far as around email goes, because I think we don't even stop because we're busy, right? And we're in a hurry and we're just doing this stuff. And if somebody sends it to us through email, we just assume that it's safe. So I think, and I got to tell you, I might have to have you back because we could probably talk a whole section only on passwords or a whole section only on
Sure
one
thing.
specific thing, which we don't really have time to do. But I kind of feel like this is a good place to stop because it makes me think that we have to take responsibility to have our own awareness of what we're doing, not with our only with our own information, but with other people's information, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's your liability there in terms of having, other, not only other people's, potentially other people's personal information that you're having to work with, um, but also proprietary information when you're working with other small business people or even companies.
Right.
We didn't even talk about storing people's credit cards with your payment system,
Whoa. Yeah.
which is a whole other
I
thing.
was gonna say that is a whole other thing, but it's true. And talk about a way of losing the trust of a client, which none of us want to do, is mishandling some kind of information, and not just losing their trust, but potentially losing their business and potentially being sued. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Whew, man. There's so much stuff to unpack. And like I said, I think maybe we'll need to do this some more, but I think that's kind of a good place to stop. But before we sign off, Patrick, I wanted to do what I call a lightning round, where I just ask you
Sure.
some quick questions. And it's funny because we'll see, you mentioned one of these earlier, not even knowing what these were going to be, but just quick answers. What are you currently reading or listening to, like in the business world or, self-improvement world right now? Any favorite books or podcasts?
Well, interesting that you mentioned that. Let's see, books or podcasts. So I'm currently finishing up Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera.
Oh, I have that and I've never read it. That's funny.
And it's a worthy read. Let's see, podcast wise, nothing stands out right now.
Okay. All right. Fair. Yeah. Okay. These next ones are going to be easy. PC or Mac? You.
Mac, absolutely.
Okay.
But a certain number of years ago, it would have been the reverse.
Okay. Good to know. Paper or digital?
Digital.
Okay. I would expect nothing less of you. And if you're when you're teaching, prefer live or online?
Both. I like both for different reasons.
Okay. All right. Cool. And last question, what's your superpower?
My superpower is troubleshooting.
And you mentioned that at the top of top of this, and I'm like, I hope he says the same thing. Yeah. So, I'll tell you what, that is an excellent superpower to have. And for anyone listening too, if you need Patrick's superpower, which a lot of us do, you will want to contact him. And like I said, I will put his information below. And I hate to stop our conversation because it's been so great, but we've kind of reached our point, I think, for now. And thank you so much for sharing your information.
Two quick things.
Yes, absolutely.
So you mentioned passwords, right? And like basically the question was, should I get a password manager? Which one should I get, more or less? Absolutely. If you have more than 3 passwords, which everyone has way more than 3 passwords, you definitely need a password manager. Okay. You should not be using the same password more than once for anything, and a password manager makes that easy. Okay. Free versus paid, that's a whole other conversation unto itself as to which ones. I would just do some research. The 3 that I can mention off the top of my head would be, and they're not in any particular order, okay. Dashlane, Bitwarden, and there's a third one I'm not remembering, but anyway.
Is it any of those? What's the one? KeePass? Have you heard that?
KeePass, that's one.
I just heard of Bitwarden very recently.
LastPass is pretty popular, okay. Although it's had issues in recent months.
So Dashlane.
Anyway, enough said.
Okay. No, it's good to have those names, because I think sometimes if we're not into it, we don't know.
Right.
So what was the other?
I'm looking into Dashlane. I'm replacing what I have, which I won't even go into what I have. It is a password manager, but it's old. It's open source. Oh, okay. There's issues, not big issues. I'm not going to give it. I'm not going to name it, okay. But not because I'm dissing it, but I'm just ready to move on to something else. Anyway, I'm giving Dashlane a try to see what that's about. Cool. Anyway, enough said.
Did you say 2 things? Was there something else?
Oh, and the second thing was, if folks want to reach me, they can find me on Facebook or primeoflifetech.com or on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Okay, I will also put those below, but good to have this in here for wherever it gets spread. So anyway, thank you so much. Hopefully
Thanks,
we can
Lori.
talk some more about this and
Hey,
contact.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, take care.
Thanks so much.
All right.
You too. Bye-bye.